much like Robert in the corner, I walk and I pace and I gesture a lot, so I'm apologizing ahead of time, especially to whoever's got to handle the camera, because I will walk a lot. The first slide I was really debating whether I keep it in here or not. The reason I kept it is it communicates that I'm a different type of person than a lot of the people in the room. Right? I'm not a computer scientist. I'm not a data scientist. Right? I don't really have computers in my background knowledge of what I've picked up throughout my career. I am an artist. I'm a graphic designer, an illustrator, that's what I do. But it has changed a lot in all of my career. Early on in my career, this is a visualization, oddly enough. The bigger the bubble, the more impact that phase of my career had to where I am today. When I first came out, I was graphic design. I did a lot of print work. And around about 93-ish, I was told that print was dead. Right? The web was out, and it's going to fundamentally change the world. And being a print graphic designer, there's no reason to stay there, so I changed my field, became web designer, and learned how to design web and develop in web. Through that work at Raster Ranch, I evolved into broadcast design, CD-ROM design, and then into software. And that's when I really got introduced into visualization and understanding how to tell the story. My other background is in illustration, so I've always been able to tell the story in pictures, but in this case, tell the story through the data as well as in the pictures. It evolved again as when I went into Microsoft. I spent 8 years in Microsoft inside the productivity division, in Office in particular. As a graphic designer, not really graphic designer, product designer in Office, my first job was designing 16 by 16 icons for Excel. Tell them that you don't want to do that job. You want to talk about pixel precision? You don't want it. But it moved on beyond that, and I became a lead within Office, and I started looking at the entire package, the entire suite, and even envisioning what Office could look like in the next 20 years. So some of the vision videos that you've seen online, I've done a few of those. Now what's interesting is everything is possible. I've reset my career once again, and now I'm at the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. And I manage a small team of about 7 or 8 user experience professionals, very diverse background. I have computer scientists in there. I also have psychologists, and I even have some data type people. First question, no. And I actually put this slide in last night because in my table, I was often asked what user experience is. You guys know what user experience is? Who does not know it? Alex, you cannot shake your head no. Who does not? We work together. Tell me you know by now. Raise your hand if you've never heard user experience before. Well, at least that's a good sign. All right, so user experience for me is about psychology and how it intersects with design. All right, it's about really understanding the user and how they work, what their needs are, what questions they ask, and how that goes back and applies back to the interactions, the visualization, the tools that you design. All right, and that's my job, is to design those tools. But I don't design them in a vacuum. All right, so much like the rest of the talks you've had over this week, understanding the process of analytics, you need to also understand how the user applies those analytics. All right, it's not enough just to know, what the loops are, because they're going to take a different approach to it based on where they're at. I put this slide in there just because Simon was a little unnerved that I'd used foul language in my talk. So what is user-centered design? Have you guys heard of user-centered design before? UCD? Who has not? It's interactive. You guys have to play with me here. All right, just a couple of you raise your hands. You got? Oh, excellent. All right, so user-centered design. It's a philosophy, really. It's how it started. This is a philosophy. And now it's become a methodology or a process. All right, so it's about understanding that user. So in terms of user experience, I have a process that I'm going to teach you guys. All right, this is a toolbox, a kit that anybody can use. You don't have to be a user experience guy. You don't have to be a graphic designer. Using this tool, you can actually understand how users behave and act, and how they use your system, and then study the impacts your system has on their tool, or on their process. So it's about understanding the needs, wants, and desires of your user. Right? A lot of times when we're building these systems, we build them for ourselves, or we build them for our sponsor. Right? But the sponsor is actually giving it to somebody else. Right? For me, research, I'm a very applied person. Right? Fundamental research is fun, but I like to take the tool and give it to somebody because I want to make an impact in someone's life. Right? I want to change the way they work. I work within a national science directorate. It's about national science. When I give a tool to somebody, I want to make an impact in the world. Right? That's something I wasn't really able to do at Microsoft, but it's something I can do at the lab. You get a better understanding of what the problems they have. Right? The toolkit that I'm going to give you is going to show you, don't just talk to them, because when you talk to them, they're going to complain about their day. Right? Their complaints are not really going to be helpful towards building the visualization. What you want to do is you want to watch how they work. Right? You want to structure your questions in a way that you get responses and answers that help you understand the questions that they're asking of the system. You want to design to the user's needs. Right? This is a big one. You don't want to build a tool that you put in front of them and they go, that's nothing I can use. And they discard it. Right? Give them the right tool for the right job. If you give them another tool, just like every other tool, they're going to get frustrated and upset. Right? And a lot of our analysts, especially the intelligence agencies, they have a lot of tools. And one more tool in their toolkit, if it's not built right, is not going to help them. But one of the other things this does is it helps you, once you have the system built, or the design's built, it lets you test back with the user. Right? So user-centered design means the user is the center. Every step in the process, you're going to take back to the user to get feedback from. Sorry. All right. So here's a definition from Usability First. It's important. Right? Otherwise, you're just building another tool that's not making an impact. Right? All right, here's the loop. This is the process. Right? Now, it's not really a loop. You can jump between the circles. But again, the key is that guy in the middle. Every step that you're taking, you're going to bring back to that user. Right? And that feedback is then going to help inform so that you can iterate and change, and it actually gets the user to buy in at the same time, which is an interesting side effect. Let's start at the top. Research. I love this part. This is really the psychology part. This is where I get to go out and talk to the users. Study them, watch them. Right? It's a little bit of ethnography. Right? It's contextual inquiry. And I'm going to go into some of these steps that you can actually use. Let's talk about contextual inquiry. This is my sweet spot. It's very hard for me to be able to do ethnography, especially in the space that I'm in, because no one's going to give me 2 or 3 days worth of time to sit and just watch them. It's creepy to them. But I get a lot more out of it. But contextual inquiry, it's a very structured question process, right? And at the same time, I get to do a little ethnography, because if I do the questions right, they're going to turn and refer to their computer and the tools that they're using to talk about their problems. Right? The key for contextual inquiry is to do the interview, right? Talk about, ask them questions like, what's your background? How long have you been in school? How long have you been working here? What types of problems do you have? And then you exchange it. Now it's your turn. Show me a problem. Show me what you do. Tell me about a time. Right? So if you've ever done, well, you haven't done interviewing, a lot of you haven't. When you do interviewing, it's like, tell me about a time where ambiguity was a big problem, right? Well, it's similar to that. Tell me about a time where analysis was very difficult, or the problem that you solved made the biggest impact, right? And they're going to tell you a story, right? And a lot of times in sort of the environments that they can't talk a lot, they give proxies. But the proxies are actually pretty close to the problem, right, without actually getting into the nuts and bolts of what the data is, right? And then you observe them, right? The key here is I want to see them using Excel. I want to see them jumping from Excel to another tool. I want to see them jumping through 8 tools, because that tells me that they're actually bouncing around a lot, right? I want to see where the gaps are that they're not able to do. When do they stop and have to write stuff down? Right? When do they start to externalize or internalize? Right? A lot of the stuff we talked about last couple of days. And then the idea here is you summarize. You've written stuff down. After you're done, you tell them what you heard, what you saw. Right? Just right there at that time, thank you for your time. This is what I saw. Right? That gets them to say, okay, yes, you are hearing, you listened to me. User survey, this is probably the cheapest way to do research, but it's also the most ineffective way to do research. Mainly, the response rate on surveys is never good. Also, it's very quantifiable. You don't get that subjective sort of conversation going. It's A to B, and maybe you get a fill-in field, and when they do a fill-in field, it's 3 or 4 sentences if you're lucky. no one's going to actually invest time because you're not there in front of their face. This is another place that I love to live, is user workshops. So a lot of the places that we go to, we don't get to watch them use their systems, right? Because of the data that they're using is not, a need-to-know kind of problems, right? But I can bring them all together, and we can do a workshop, right? And Chris Cook and I, we do workshops a lot, right? I've done them with DHS, I've done them with Department of Defense, I've done them in cybersecurity situations, and it's interesting to see, the problems are very similar, right? Knowledge sharing is always a big problem. Documentation, understanding, right? I hate writing stuff, but we hear it over and over again. We see it over and over again. But the workshops help sort of bring out sort of those pain points, right? So during a workshop, you may spend the first 2 hours doing an affinity mapping session. Tell me about your pain, and everybody writes them on sticky notes. And then you start to group and cluster those sticky notes, and you get these big themes, right? And then the next day, you spend on 1 or 2 of these themes to help build out solutions, right? This is a little bit of participatory design, where the users are actually coming up with a solution with you, right? That is a huge buy-in for that user community if they're seeing solutions that you're building came from them. Next phase is about definition. This is where you start to write stuff down. The reason why you write stuff down, at least I write stuff down, because I'm a user experience guy, I'm a graphics guy. My fingers don't go to code, but I need to articulate what I heard to the guys who are doing the development. Right, to the data scientists. Right, the one thing I didn't cover in the research phase, a lot of times I pair with a data scientist. Right, the reason why I do that is they're going in and they're getting sort of the data requirements, where I'm getting the user requirements. And the two of us together actually make for a complete set of requirements. Right, because the user says, oh, I really wish I had temporal data. And I want to be able to do these timelines. And then if the data scientist comes back and says, yeah, there's no temporal data in here, right? Why give them a temporal solution when it's just a flat line? Right? So sometimes what the user wants, they don't actually have in data. Right? So you have to pair with someone who actually can come back and tell you what this system can actually say and do. So in the definition phase, the user requirements document is very important. Right? It's often overlooked. It's overlooked almost everywhere except for like big companies, Microsoft, Google, Facebook. They all do these user requirements. But on a small scale, if you don't have user requirements, what are you building your tool to? Right? If I get hit by a bus, or I win the lottery, let's do that. Right? What is left behind that you know what was done previously? Right? That's why user requirements are important. Personas. This is a sticky wicket. This is come and gone, it's come back again. All right, so writing of personas is almost like doing, let me give you an example. Office. So when I was in Office, and this was about 2007, the entire Office suite was built off of 4 personas. Only 4. All of Office. That's Outlook, Excel, PowerPoint, I mean all of it. Right? There's another product called Dynamics, which is an Office, which is the business intelligence tool. 45 personas. 1 tool. Right? So it's an interesting thing when you think about it. But a persona is essentially describing a type of user. So your user research gets boiled down into themes of types of users. Right? So in Office, one of them was, oddly enough, a soccer mom. Right? And it described what she did, how she used it, why using Office was important. Another one was a student. Another one was a subject matter expert in finance. Right? And the last one, I can't remember what the last one was. Doesn't matter. But the idea here is each one of these personas actually defines a day in the life for this person. It describes what their needs and wants are, much like the user research does. Right? So it's sort of a method to describe the user. Right? And if everybody on the team buys off on it, if your developers buy off on it, your designer buys off on it, your sponsor and your user buys off on it, right? I've defined Emily. Emily does this. Emily needs this. Everybody buys off on it. Even when the sponsor's not with you or the users aren't with you, you refer back to Emily, right? I think we need to be able to do this. Would Emily use it, right? Based on the requirements that we have, right? And the developers do the same thing, right? If you're a hardcore developer, right, the last thing you want to do is think about a user, but if someone asks you what Emily would do, suddenly you're rethinking some of the decisions you're doing. Right? If you get everybody bought off on a persona, it's really cool. Scenario. So this goes towards the storytelling part, right? So when you're looking at how users use things and the user requirements, it's not just about the questions they ask, it's about the tasks that they do. Have you guys done Agile? Right, so Agile has user stories, which is the sort of the base of the task, right? And you develop based on this user story. User story is very similar to use case. And a scenario is like stitching together a bunch of these use cases together, right? And the idea is you want to sort of, a scenario tells the story of the software from I first log into the thing, I do a bunch of analysis, I do some work, and then I export it into something else so that I move it on to somewhere else. Right, so you want to tell the entire story, stitch together these use cases in a way that you can tell the story of how your software gets used or your visualization gets used. Design. I love to be in design. This is where I get to draw. This is where I get to actually put pen to paper. Sketching. All right, how many of you guys sketch? I'm impressed. There's a lot more sketching. How often do you sketch? Yeah, well, how many of you sketch like 5 or 6 times a day? Excellent, right? How many of you sketch 5 or 6 times a week? And it's all perspective, right? What phase am I in, right? When you first start an idea, what's the first thing you do, right? When you have a concept, do you sketch it first, or do you go right to code? Right? I'm going to suggest you start sketching. Right? It's easy to burn paper than it is to delete code. Right? Especially as developers, the guys I work with, they don't want to change the code once it gets started. Right? But I can sketch and sketch and sketch and sketch. Right? Who's nervous about sketching? You're going to be sketching this afternoon. Right? Are you nervous about sketching? Excellent. Well, let me give you a toolkit. Who thinks they can draw? Actually, who thinks they can't draw? Most of the room. That's perfect. All right. All right, so all I have here is a piece of graph paper. You can use any kind of paper at all, right? Can you do this? That was hard. Can you make that? You started sketching. All right, can you do this? Ooh, too much caffeine. Square. You can make a square, right? They don't have to be perfect corners. They can be round. It doesn't matter. Can you make that? Anybody can't? Really, a square? Just apply yourself. Okay. How about if we take it a little further? Oh, that's a tough one. Oh, no, not a circle. Not perfect. Anybody can make a circle. Right? Those 3 shapes become the fundamental for any sketch that you're going to do. Right? A sketch isn't the final code. It's not the final look and feel. You're just dropping ideas down, right? You can do additional things like, ooh, triangles, right? And everything needs an X. You want to be able to close the thing, right? So the idea here is these sort of tools, this is just basic vocabulary, right? If you can do those shapes, you're going to be able to do just fine this afternoon. Don't be intimidated by sketching. And the idea of sketching, it's iterative. You sketch, throw it away. Sketch, throw it away. Sketch, compare, sketch, throw one away. All right? Now, those shapes then become sticky paper. Those shapes. All right? See your squares? See the closes? See the lines? Same vocabulary. If you get fancy and tricky, those shapes become those shapes. Common cursors, common icons. Don't even think about icons. Don't. An icon is a square. Right? Every icon you do a square. Do a line saying, this is open. Do a square. This is import data. Right? Don't bother doing shapes and illustrations for all these icons. Don't. All those build even more to become that. In focus. There we go. All right, now I've got a geospatial tool with timeline, with icons for selectors, right? And I've even got a representation of the browser. Straight lines, circles, triangles, X's. Okay? You don't even have to be that elaborate with it. You definitely don't do it that big. All right, let me give you an example. These are some of my early sketches. Oops, try again. Back. So I have a project called Next Gen Communication Interoperability. It's a build off of the presentation, or the Precision Information Environment work with DHS. Right? I was tasked to think about what does emergency response look like in the next 10 years. All right, so we immediately started thinking about technologies and the things that we could do that's just on the cusp. This is about 3 years old. You know, just at the time Google Glass was coming out and no one had one yet. So we thought, wouldn't it be cool to do augmented reality? And so we started thinking about that, and then it was just sketch after sketch after sketch. Notice I have a lot of text on here. That text describes the content as opposed to me having to draw it all out. The sketches also start to sort of define how I would change the thing later. Other examples. Notice they're small frames, they're vignettes. All right? That's because every idea is disposable. Draw small boxes, put as much into them, and then draw the next one and the next one. Right? It's starting to do storyboarding as well. So maybe you have sequential things. Right? A lot of times, not a lot of times, almost all visualizations these days are about transition and animation. Right? You look at software in general, it's not just click and cut and move. It actually does cool stuff. And you can actually start to describe what that cool stuff looks like, right, when you're doing these types of sketches. Notice the use of color. Right? So you don't have to stick with black and white. Start thinking about what color encoding means. Right? Start thinking about how you would use color for selection, right, or for an encoding on top. All right, wireframing. Now you've done the sketches. Now what you can do is maybe you're going to go into the computer. And what you're going to do, wireframe, what it does is it's a refinement of the sketches that you've done. Right? And you're not going into like Photoshop to do this thing. Right? You can do it in PowerPoint. Right? And you're just dropping boxes. When you're dropping boxes, what you're doing is you're just sort of doing like information architecture. You guys know what information architecture means? Right? Websites use information architecture all the time. But information architecture is just as important in visualization. Right? Because you know, what takes the priority space? Right? What do you want the user to see first in a visualization tool? Right? As they start to build this thing, where do you want them to start and where do you want them to go to next? Right? As they build this thing up, as they're doing the analysis, how does it change? Right? You want to sort of have that ideas in mind of how that workflow is. It's built from your scenario and use cases from before. And I was trying to find examples of the wireframe, but this isn't my laptop, so I didn't have good examples. These are some really bad examples because you shouldn't use color for wireframe. But this gives you an idea of sort of how I start to frame stuff out. In this case, it was in Illustrator. This is a little bit more refined than what I would call wireframing. All right, design spec. You guys probably don't ever have to worry about design specs. Chances are you're going to get as far as the sketch and you're going to start building anything, which is fine. Right? But if you have a user experience person, or if you really want to document what you're going to build, say you've got a tester who's going to do it, right? It'd be great to start doing design specs, right? So that the tester can see what's being done. Also, the sketches that I showed, the wireframes that I showed, remember that loop with the user in the center? You're taking those sketches back to the user, right? You're taking your concepts back to them. The ones that you think are great, take them back. You have got nothing bought into this thing. You've got no code written, right? And you've spent half day doing these sketches. Take them back to the user. Get feedback, right? Do A/B testing just in paper. Do that paper prototype right there, right? And when you're doing it with them, give them a pen and a pad of paper, and they're drawing it with you, right? Because they could do circles, squares, and diamonds just like you can, right? And because you're doing this participatory design, that user's bought off. They're already, oh, this is cool, I'm going to keep doing this. And then we start building the tool and you show it to them, this is what you suggested. This is why we did this. Right? And they're like, I know, this is great. This is exactly what I want. So design specs become more refined. Right? And this is where I get to be Illustrator again, which is kind of fun. When you're doing specs, be very descriptive about what's going on. It's not just about the picture. In this case, I do a lot of storyboarding. So again, this is for Next Gen Communication Interoperability. I take that scenario that I wrote. All right, and that scenario is about 2 or 3 pages. It's the story. And I establish keyframes in that story about things that I could show. And those keyframes then become big slides like this, or they become video. All right, so this big slide actually describes a lot of the system without me having to get in there and write the technical parts of it. All right, it's enough for a developer to see it, or enough for the user to see it, to say yes or no. We would never be able to do that. We would love to do that. When you're doing user experience, and I said you, not me, I am a user experience designer, but you can do user experience too. User experience is not just about the look and feel. It's not just about the design. User experience is about the interaction. It's about the system. More importantly, it's about the environment that they're in. You need to think about the system, the computer they're on. You need to think about how they sit. Right? You need to think about the displays that they have. Right? And design to those as opposed to what you assume would be. All right, so if they've got touch tables, think about the user experience of a touch table. Don't think about it in terms of the pixel precision. It fundamentally changes. Right? You have a 360-degree environment as opposed to a vertical axis. Just a couple more of those. Right? And so you sort of have, I do this sort of scene setting thing, which describes the environment that they're in. And then what I'll usually do is jump into the software and start describing the steps in diagrams. And when you're doing it, you're talking about, if they click this, this is what it looks like. If there's a tooltip, this is what it looks like, right? So this is the sequential stuff, right? If he clicks here, we zoom in here. We click this, it pops this up, right? And I can show you one other thing. A lot of times what I've started doing is my specs in video. So this started, all right, so I was on a silly project called Zoom. You guys ever remember Zoom? You ever heard about the Zoom? Are you a music player guy? Right? So about the same time the iPods came out, Microsoft said, oh, we'll compete, we'll release the Zoom, which was a brown brick that was all god-awful. All right, but the cool thing was the entire experience was all done in a tool called After Effects. Right? So all the spec was done in movies and videos. Right? And actually all of Xbox right now is all done in movies and videos as well. Right, so they rarely go to documents now. They just bring up movies and videos and show it how it's done. So this is an example of how a video can be used to show sort of how a system could be designed. So what this starts to show is, when things draw on, how should they draw on? How fast? In this case, it's a little slow because there's some talking that happens here. But, what does the interaction look like when you click things? What does it look like, as you touch? In this case, it's a touch screen. The developer can take this and they just go, okay, I see exactly what you mean, and I'm going to build it just like you said. And then what you do is you iterate with the developer based on that. You take this video to the user, same thing, give feedback. Any questions on any of that?
You build the components first in another program.
Yeah. So I'm a big Adobe Suite fan, so I use Illustrator, Photoshop. I build all the artifacts, the components, bring them into After Effects, and then start building the animations from it. The nice thing about After Effects is it actually remembers the layers from Photoshop and Illustrator, so you don't have to actually copy, paste, or import.
How long would you say it takes to make one of those?
So I was doing videos 2 weeks ago. It was about 2 or 3 hours per video, and the videos were about 5 seconds long, but it showed multiple interaction steps that were happening. So it takes almost as long for me to write it up as it takes for me to build a video. But the video is much more descriptive than someone else trying to read it. Yeah?
If you're doing this in a situation where you're on a brownfield instead of a greenfield site, one of the criticisms that's been given to the government visual service in the UK, I think there's a probably down there yet, is that it tends to focus on the analytical visual layer and not account for the system behaviours that are in the jars and get a mismatch, and then it becomes a bit superficial. I was just wondering how you account for that. I'm not just thinking whether you account for not like how, but as the system underneath of the personality as much as the user.
Okay, so that's a great question, and one I should have brought up with personas. So going back to persona, one persona that's always good to use for visualization is that of data. Right? Data itself is not a user, but it's a persona that you have to answer to, right? So that starts to that. Another thing that I've taken to doing when I'm working with my developers and my visualization scientists is they tell me what the thing's going to do, and then I show what it looks like on the screen. But I do a whole other slide that shows what the data is going to do, and then I show how it morphs into the screen. Right? When I was at Microsoft, we did these videos where we're envisioning the future, and what we had was like users were working, right, and you'd see the screens that they were in, and then we did these sort of overlays on top that shows sort of the mechanics of the data and the communication network that's making this screen happen at the same time. So by overlaying sort of like the back-end schematic, the box and stick diagrams, as well as the display, helps communicate to the sponsor. It's more of a sponsor communication than typically user-based, because the user really doesn't care necessarily a lot about what's going on in the back end, as long as they can trust what's going on in the front end. Let me see if I can bounce back to where we were. All right, adapt. Again, this is not sequential, right? Because I already talked about when I do sketches and define, I'll go over to measure and do sort of the usability studies just off the sketches, right? Which I'll talk about in a minute. All right, so adapting. This is where it really gets interesting because you may have all the best of intentions in concept and design and interface. But the truth is when you start actually putting the code down on the computer, you can't build what you thought you could. Right? The constraints within the platform that you built, or the constraints of time mean that you have to take shortcuts, or you have to compromise some of the designs and ideas that you had when you build it. Right? Now, that compromise happens all the time. Right? And for me, when I was early in terms of my design experience, it frustrated the hell out of me. But it's just a fact of life. You have to accept it. As a designer, as a software guy, you have to accept at times scope, time, money, platform restrictions. You can't build exactly what you want to. And when that case happens, that's when you're in the adapt phase, right? So you're into development, now you're adapting based on things that are being built. But the key is, even in the adapt phase, when you're under development, you've got to communicate back to the user what's happening. So that when you release, if it doesn't look anything like what you told them it was going to look like, they know. All right, this is what's really cool about Agile. So if you're doing Agile, and you really are lucky, and you have the user in your sprints, and they're actually in there during the Agile cycle, and they're in with the code, they're seeing this change happen. You're never going to get that much time with the user. Right? But you need to communicate that with them that this is changing, and this is why, and that way they accept it, so that when they actually see the code, when you're ready to do usability tests with them, they're not surprised by it. Be flexible. Document the changes. Measure. This is again where I get sort of jazzed, right? Because this is when we've done all this work, the user's bought in, we built the tool, now I'm going to take it back to the user and see their eyes light up. God, I hope their eyes light up. All right? And the idea here is the techniques that you use to measure feedback back into the loop. All right? So some of the things you can do. The easiest one is a heuristic evaluation. And these are usually done by professional usability engineers, where they run through the system. They have a set list of things and criteria that they check to make sure that it's useful, right? And then they give you a report. It's not about the user at this point. This is just this user researchers, this usability engineer's feedback to you. But it's based on a scientific rigor, right? So that every time you give it to him and he does this heuristic, you get some of the same sort of characteristics. Cheapest way to do it. A/B testing becomes a little more expensive. So A/B testing, if you guys write a lot of publications, A/B testing is really important for those. A/B testing is really cool when you're doing sketches, because I can quickly sketch something up. What if I did this compared to this? Which one would work better for you? Right? When you're in code, it's a little bit hard. I know, I got to stop pacing. You're getting frustrated, aren't you? See, usability, I'm feeding off you here. When you're doing this A/B test, it's small iterations. Don't give big changes because you're not going to get the feedback that you need, right? Tweak a little and then do A/B. Tweak a little more, do A/B. If you say, what if I give you a geospatial tool and compare it to a timeline? That's too big, right? They're like, I like both, I don't know, right? Give them the small iteration changes for A/B testing. This was kind of interesting. So that's defining measure. Consider the length of the study. All right, so here's an example of this. So I was doing a study on a cyber system where I had about an hour with my users. Right? And I had 25 users in line to do this study. I had 3 main tasks for them to perform. And within that hour, that's not a lot of time because those tasks actually break down into subtasks. It gets really big. And if you don't allocate amount of time to spend on a task, you're never going to get to the end of the study. All right, so in a couple's cases, they got to the end of the first one and half of my hour's already over. I know I'm already screwed, right? I've got to only give them 20 to 30 minutes. I mean, basically give them the amount of time needed. But at some point, you're going to have to say, yeah, okay, let's move on. We need to do something else. Otherwise, your study's sort of ruined. You only got 20 as opposed to 21, right? Because it's going to slant and change the step. All right, usability testing. This one's great, too, because you actually get to be back with the user. And if you're really lucky, you get to actually sit in their space and they've installed in their space. Chances are you've got a laptop and you're in a coffee shop with the user. That's generally how it happens if you're lucky. But watch them use it, right? If you're really lucky, they use it on their real data. And you can see them solve the real problems that they have, right? That's kind of like why I like Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Response, because I had access to users all the time, right? Nice thing about officers, they love to talk. And they love to play with stuff, right? And the more I can get that feedback early, the better. It's all about the user, right? And when you're designing a tool that's all about the user and for the user, you're designing a tool that they're going to use. It's not a tool that they're going to play with for a week and then not use anymore, right? You want to make an impact. At least I do. Do you guys want to make an impact? Wow, I put you to sleep. Really? All right, so why should you care? These are stats that are generally more on the engineering side. All right, so this is, I can't pronounce this, Boehm, 1981. Doing user studies and involving the user reduces the cost of building software, flat out. It's been proven. It also reduces the training time because you're already catching sort of the snags and the hard-to places during the studies. Right? If I'm showing the user and it's taking them an hour to do something that should take them 15 minutes, I'm going to change the design to make it easier for them to use. Right? So you're cutting training time as well. Let's make it intuitive as opposed to having them read a document first. Let's skip this one because this really doesn't apply to us, higher sales. Who gets to sell software here? It improves productivity. So if you actually make it intuitive to use and they're able to actually do the job at hand quickly, efficiently, and they get insight quicker, they're more productive doing it. Right? Microsoft spends, oddly enough, rather than don't believe this, Microsoft spends a fortune on usability tests for all their products. Right? And you ask, well, why is it so buggy and so hard to use? It's because it is a very hard system. All right. The average interface has over 40 defects. The more eyes you have on those defects, the more likely you are to find them. Right? So get the user feedback. You're going to have multiple users. You're going to have more than one person looking at your code. Yeah. All right. So why is it important for visual analytics? Believe it or not, visualizations are a lot more complicated than a typical software system. Right? You've got things that are more subjective to the user. Right? So you need to think about that interpretation. Right? We've been talking about visual encodings. We've been talking about what view is the right view. We've been talking about the sense-making loop. All that needs to be thought about in the context of the user. Watch them use it. Understand it. Right? The visualization is only as good as what the user can interpret from it. there's no real guideline or standard today, right? We've got lots of research that sort of says this could be good, this could be good, right? Compared to like a normal software suite, right? Buttons should look like this, right? Scroll bars need to look like this. Scrolling behaviors. I mean, there's all kinds of guidelines out for Office. All kinds of guidelines out just for Android phones. There's no real guideline or standard that everybody can go to with visualization. In order to establish that, it's sort of work with your user to figure it out. If you build your visualization right, if you build your visual analytic tool correctly, you're going to change the way they work. Right? Cool thing that comes out of user-centered design is you get to redefine methodology. Right? You get to redefine their process with them. Right? Suddenly they can do this so much quicker. That doesn't mean that, you know, I can do this job 30% quicker than before. That doesn't mean I get to lay off 30% of my staff. That means 30% of the time can be spent doing something else, right? And doing something more differently, right? And you can fundamentally rethink the process, right? That is really kind of cool when you start really seeing how users use your software. I kept this slide just because I think it's funny. So thinking about usability or user experience, these are some of the signs that I found online. This one was actually in the restroom at P&L, the top two. It was right above the sink. The dryer was actually over here. Right? And when I was like, I get a push button for bacon. I thought that was, I got to do that. Right? Yields to bicycles doing wheelies backwards. Trucks tip over when they're over 10,000 pounds. Right? I mean, you got to think about it. You know, user experience just isn't just about software, right? It's about experience in life in general as well. All right, so let's say we all get it. What's the real problem? I'm behaving. I'm not saying any expletive. You gotta like me. One of the real challenges here is access to users is very, very difficult, especially in the intelligence space. But the truth is our users, they have a day job. Right? And anytime you do these usability studies or this user research, contextual inquiry, you're taking time, thank you, away from that job. Right? So you really, really need to budget the time that you spend. Right? You need to figure out how you get that access. It's going to take 2 or 3 years to get that access to the user. Work on it, network it. Right? Build it into your proposals. Right? It's not enough just to say, I'm going to build and research this tool. Work with your sponsor. Give me access to your users so that I can build the right tool for you. Right? It's got to be in the proposal. Budget, time. This is one that I ran up against with Alex Endert over and over again while he was at P&L. Right? How do I don't want to spend time on user experience and doing those sketches and those designs because I only have this much money. Right? And if I spend this much money at just doing your work, I never get to do the research. Right? And that's not the way it should work. Right? We need to build these into the proposal so that we can have time to understand the user pain and the questions that they're asking so you build the right tools as opposed to, I only have time to build it, and I hope it's right. This is actually more about the sponsor. When you have a sponsor, chances are they're going to say, I'm your user. Just show it to me. Right? And what they're really doing is they represent a bunch of users, and you hope they understand. A lot of times they have to be the proxy, but you need to work with your sponsors to get access, is what this is really saying. And what you know, in order to do that, you need to educate them. Right? You need to educate the people you work with about why user experience is important. You need to educate the sponsors about why user experience is important. Chances are you don't have to educate the user. Once you start talking to them, they're going to get it right away. Any questions? Yeah.
So practically you are designing tools to help people doing tasks that they are already doing to increase their productivity. And as you mentioned, you're using different tools, for example, the sketching tool you looked at enhancing, increasing the productivity of your process?
Increasing the productivity of the stuff that I do? I need to do a user study on myself.
So you have
I would love to have somebody do it. I can't do it on myself, but I would love to have like Adobe come out and watch me work. No, I have not actually. But I,
But
Yeah.
as you said, you have like several problems in the way of your courses.
Mhm.
Yeah. And one of the things you have different kinds of tools that you are using. So how you put all of this work together into one project? You have different people working, some on data analysis, some on
yeah.
designers.
Yep. Yep, great question. So when I was talking about the 7 or 8 people that I have, right, I have people who are really good at doing the user research side and the analysis, right? So once you do the user research and you've collected data from users, and it's usually 15 users if you're lucky, and you get enough users to actually understand the problem. The really interesting part is the analysis of all this data, right? So we have statisticians. We have one HCI guy who's extremely good at doing this analysis. He's got a number of encoding methods that he uses and to actually pull out these themes and topics. We also have people who are really good in interaction, right? So it's very much a matrix, but we also have the generalist, right? So I'm more of a generalist. I'll tend to do one project and I'll do a little bit of everything. And then when I find I need help, I pull in someone else to help. Yeah. Does that answer that question?
So each one has its own tool.
Yeah.
You have one tool that is
There's no one tool to rule it all. Much like the analyst that you're going to investigate and talk to, right? They're going to be using 15 different tools, and you need to slide in the 16th tool that works within those 15. You're not going to be building a tool that rules them all either, right? I mean, it's not realistically possible to build a tool that big, to change that much, right? So actually, this is interesting. So how much time do I have? Am I way over or am I okay?
7 minutes.
7 minutes. All right. Let me give you a simple description or explanation. In visualization, what does the color red mean? Bad. Right? What's the color green mean? Good. All right. Is that fundamental across every single domain? It's cultural. Color blindness. The one culture that I thought for sure red would be bad, green would be good, is the power grid in the United States. No. Red is good, green is bad. Right? And I'm like, guys. Right? And so I built the tool. I said, okay, you just guys need to rethink the way you're thinking. Right? Red needs to be bad, green needs to be good. But it sits next to these 20 other tools where red is good, green is bad. Right? So I had to change the way I encoded, because that's the way they see things, right? So that's sort of what I'm talking about. You have questions? Yeah.
You talked about a lot of evaluation surveys, studies.
Uh-huh.
You didn't really talk about mass studies,
I wish I had more exposure to those. The lab I'm at, we've done some and had really good results from them, but I have yet to do those myself. We use Mechanical Turk internally. I'm trying to think if I can talk about the project, probably shouldn't. But sort of crowdsourcing sort of user requirements in that case. It's actually pretty cool. I don't have an answer, I'm afraid, because I haven't done it, but I know it's possible. Okay. Any others? Yeah.
So in the evaluation, you're looking at the functionality of the product and its impact on user performance, and you can quantify that in terms of time, etc.
Accuracy. Yep.
Do you have any ways of quantifying the form, the visual appearance, the aesthetics? Is that a matter of personal taste of the user? Are there ways in which you can compare two things objectively?
I wish. I wish. It is very subjective. I will a lot of my interfaces tend to be on the dark side with white, right? And then I show it the next user and they want white on dark, right? And it's like, just to personalize it. I'm like, I'm not going to build personalization tools, right? Look and feel is very subjective, right? When it comes to the visualization metaphors, the visualization themselves, try not to have those be very subjective. The colors you use need to be mappable to accessible color standards. The encodings, the symbols you use, make sure they are recognizable to all users in general. Right? You're never going to get 100% scores in terms of this is exact. This looks like a save icon. Well, save icons is a bad example. But, you know, this looks like an open layer file. Right? You're only going to get some percentage of the users. Okay. As far as I know, there isn't any. Does anybody know of any? Talk to me afterwards because I want to know. Okay. Yep.
Do you have any problems with things getting set in stone too early when you're interacting with your users so much that they like a feature that was proposed by a designer that then gets written off by a programmer who's unable to do the thing that they've tried to do?
Yeah, that happens all the time too.
And is there any way that you try and mitigate that? And the same with management as well. We like a feature that you've designed early on, but then we decide that it's no good as
Yeah, so that does happen all the time. And that's where you've got to adapt, but you've got to keep communicating to the user, right? And if, hopefully you have more than one user, right? It may be a feature that one user really wanted, but if all 10, they didn't work for them, it only worked for 1 out of 10, then you're okay, right? Work with them, get them to buy back in again, right? It's all about communication. The sponsor one's a tougher one. Let me give you one more story. With Department of Homeland Security, we were building a screen that goes in an operations center. It was meant to be one of these big displays they have on the walls. It was targeting the operations section chief, which is the head of command in the United States. And the idea here was we were doing a situation awareness wall that was meant to be touch, right? So they could walk up and they could get instant, understanding of the situation. Sponsor came to us and said, I just heard about proxemics. I want the Connect system on here so that they don't have to do touch. I want them to be able to walk up and gesture to the thing. And we thought, that sounds like fun research. And we should have went back to the user. We didn't. That sounds like fun. So we built it, right? It still had the touch interface, but we actually allowed them to, as they approach it, it changes, and then they could gesture in front of it. And we thought, this is going to be cool, right? So we put it in and started doing tests with this section chief, right? And it turns out he wouldn't gesture in front of the thing, especially during situations, right? Because he's the head of command, and he wasn't about to do Dance Dance Revolution in front of his subordinates, right? So we had this great gesture interface, which his subordinates loved, but he was like, interesting, right? And he would walk up and touch, but he would never gesture in front of the thing. And that happened like 3 different times with 3 different leads, right? So any change that even comes from a sponsor, right, try and loop it back to the user to make sure that it's going to be used. You good? Time-wise? We're done.
We're about right, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Russ, thank you very much for that. That was